Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. And today, my guest is Steve Zich. Steve is the Chief Marketing Officer at Capital Credit Union in Green Bay, Wisconsin. What I like about Steve's perspective is he's a marketer who's actually in the weeds with AI, not just talking about it at conferences, but using tools like Jasper and predictive analytics platforms with his team every day. He's thought carefully about what it means for AI to complement creative work rather than replace it. And he's got real campaign results to back it up. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ankur. Excited.
Maybe to start off with, what does a marketing operation look like at Capital Credit Union? What does your team own, and what does the team do day to day?
When it comes to marketing operations, especially in the financial space, especially in credit unions, they can range from very small operators to, brand teams of 20 to 30 people. Our team is built around 12, 13 people. And I like to say it's a small but mighty team. And we own, everything from the execution of campaigns to drive growth, to brand stewardship, to really, create that awareness, and also community. That community relationship, building those partnerships, building those relationships throughout, not only in the community, but with non-members as well. So really, it's the full spectrum of what you would think a marketing department should own.
So right now, I think every conference in financial services has AI nearly in every keynote, right? As a CMO sitting in these rooms, how do you separate what the signal is from all the noise? So in other words, what is real about what's happening on the AI front that's leading to tangible outcomes versus what's just marketing theater?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have varying perspectives and opinions when it comes to this. But if I could really boil it down, your AI, that word, we hear it every day. We hear it at all the conferences, like you say, that we go to. But undoubtedly, it is the buzzword of the moment. It's the word of the day. And I think what's critical is the approach that we take, both with curiosity and with this idea of discernment. And when I sit in these rooms, when I go to these conferences and I listen to these keynote addresses or I listen to these small breakouts, I really like to focus in on three really areas that I allow myself to filter out the noise, and separate, what's real. And when I mean by real, I mean what's valid, what I can use, what I can take back to the team, what I could pass on, versus what is, the next great big thing. And it comes down to these three things. It comes down to that idea of member centricity. I really sit back and I ask myself, how does this AI application solve a real member's pain point or enhance, that experience? Because at the end of the day, when I think about our brand, it comes down to that experience. What is the experience that we want to create for our members? What's that experience that we want to create for our community? And if the conversation is all about the technology and not about the member or the customer, then I feel like it's a little bit of noise. The second thing is really comes down to scalability and the practicality of the AI tool. I look at examples of AI being implemented at scale, not just in a pilot program, but what are some use cases? What are some different best practices that are being used, how it's being used, right? And then if it's not something that can be totally operationalized and deliver with measurable ROI, then maybe we're just talking a little bit of hype. So I really got those two things really have to come together. And then the third thing, which is probably the most important, is how does it align with the strategy? How does it align with not only our marketing strategy, but how does it align with the organizational strategy? Because at the end of the day, that all rolls back up to one. I really like to evaluate whether that AI solution, can aligns with our brand goals, and it comes back to the values that we have. Not every shiny new tool at the end of the day is right for the organization. So I want to really have us think about, and not only from my team's perspective, but myself, right? Are we chasing a trend or are we, and if we're chasing a trend, is that diluting from the focus? So really those three things, I'll go back to member centricity. Is it scalable? And does it align with the strategy?
I think the tools keep changing around marketing. I think it's one of the areas that I think it was maybe earliest affected in terms of AI having an impact. And we'll talk about the tools and software in this space in just a second. But I think it's one that was affected early on and continues to change dramatically in terms of how content is created, how personalization happens, the distribution channels. Even though they are the same, how you actually operate the channels has changed quite a bit, and even the effectiveness. So I suppose in a world where everyone's using a lot of AI tooling and software, how do you make sure that your team has a differentiated message, right? Because I think otherwise what happens is that there's like some commoditization because everyone's using the same tools, maybe same set of 4 or 5 models. And so the content and the marketing language even could in theory get commoditized. But I think what's really important is from your frame is that the customer or member centricity, which is how do you make sure that your unique voice continues to show through regardless of which tool you use. So how do you think about that problem?
At the end of the day, AI is a complement to your work. It's not there to do the work for you, right? So the one thing when it comes to really protecting the brand voice, making sure that there's still some authenticity to what we're trying to say and it doesn't sound like everything else, is making sure that there's a human touch to it. And I think that's something that as we continue through this conversation, you'll probably hear me say a couple times, is that to really be able to use an AI tool, to be able to use it right and use it in a way that allows you to be efficient. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what AI is about that efficiency and how you can scale it, is making sure that there's that human element that's still connected to that content you're trying to create. So however you use that AI to jumpstart a thought, help it brainstorm, or allow you to, start the process of creating, for example, maybe a blog or some copy. You start it, right? And then you allow that AI to have that conversation going back and forth to refine and perfect it. That way, I believe that you still have not only your own creative thought that's injected into it, but at the same time, when that happens, the brand voice that you're trying to communicate and connect the audience with still is relevant and still is pure.
Yeah, I think it's coming down to how our teams using the tooling, but still allowing their unique frame, perspective, voice to ultimately show through. So I think this idea of AI, and it could be slotted in any word, right? Like just software. How does software complement the creative practice that you have? How does that work? And I think your team has been using Jasper, which I think in some ways even predates ChatGPT. It does predate ChatGPT. It was one of the early ones to kind of go and use the GPT series from OpenAI to go and introduce better tooling for the marketing teams. Could you speak a little bit about how your teams are using tools like Jasper and perhaps others? Maybe the tooling has changed over the years, but I'm just curious, how does that work day to day at your organization?
Yeah, we are using Jasper, and Jasper came about to this team through actually a, a colleague, a friend of mine who works for another company. He serves as a chief marketing officer for another company, actually in a totally completely different vertical. And I was in this group and I heard him talking about it and how how it helped his team to become more efficient. And because it was at that probably early stages about 2 years ago now, that and it goes back to that idea when we were bringing this idea up and bringing it to the team, there was this sense of fear of, should Jasper, could a tool like Jasper or ChatGPT be the right fit for us or the right tool for us? Because I feel like I'm cheating, right? I think every marketer feels like they're, that it's robbing us of that creativity. And I think the great thing that happened in that conversation was that he said it absolutely is not robbing you of your creativity. because it allows you to actually think a little bit more broader, and allows you to go a little bit deeper. And in turn, when you're able to do that, you actually create some pretty compelling content. So Jasper, we jump. I heard that, and it was enough for me to jump on board and say, okay, let's bring this in to our team and allow us to use it. And at first, yeah, there was some early adoption. But at the same time, that early adoption was a little bit of a struggle, because, that framework and that mindset that we had of, is it robbing us of our creativity? We had to get over that hurdle. So as Jasper came into the fold and we started using a more and more, we not only were able to use it for just creating content, but it was also allowed us to start using it to create outlines of thought and strategy, and being able to go, what I like to say, rift back and forth. Because at the end of the day, I really wanted the team to recognize and be able to use it as not just a tool, but think of it as your AI twin, right? It's you being able to, if you had that ability to be able to talk back and forth with yourself, what would that look like? Let Jasper be that person on the other side of the table or on the other side of the mirror, to allow you to riff back and forth and to be able to allow you to go deeper, broader, and create some really good content. And early on, it was a little bit of it started out slow, but right now, 2 years in, I think the team has become very more adaptive to it and more excited to use it. And they allow themselves to use it in such a way that does go back to creating a little bit more efficiency to the team.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the past people would use it as a first draft. They would just prompt, they would get a first draft, then sometimes they would run with that first draft, maybe a little bit of polish, and that's it, right? There wasn't like this iterative loop. But I think what you're alluding to is it's deeper than that. Basically, you're using it as kind of a co-pilot or a peer of sorts, where you can go back and forth and refine your ideas. So it's brainstorming in some ways and helping you sharpen your way of thinking. And I think that creates a lot more value, because ultimately it ends up being a peer to you, almost like a colleague of sorts, and it's being used along the way, right? It's not just used to help you brainstorm; it's also helping you create the drafts and refine the drafts and get feedback all the way through to the very end. Um, is that the right way to think about it, Steve? I just want to make sure I nailed what you were saying earlier.
That's spot on, Ankur. And I think, as I think about it, that idea of, I think I used the example actually last week with a team member. If you're gonna think about it, use Jasper and think about it as you're writing something, you're throwing it back over the fence to me, and it's coming back and forth, and we're going back and forth on it.
And then I suppose maybe if we take a step back and say, before you had your team adopt Jasper, what were the ROI metrics that you were tracking or aspirationally tracking? So it could be efficiency gains as an example. And I'm just curious sort of where you landed relative to what you thought would be the impact. Were there any surprises there?
Uh, it was all about the efficiency gains. So again, it's, we could spend a whole day maybe trying to come up and with content, from the brainstorming to the writing. That could take a whole day sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do. Jasper, being able to use Jasper allowed us to really cut back on that in hours, literally hours. I don't have the exact number in front of me. I wish I did right now. But I was actually, I was reporting back to our exec team on the use of this particular AI tool on my team. And over the course of the year, it was, I want to say, a couple hundred hours that we had saved using Jasper, which is huge, because that allows us to be able to do more, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
and I think that's the one word that every marketer dreads is, you always want us to do more. Well, it's true, but at the same time, it's up to us to be able to find ways to be able to meet that need. And Jasper allows us to do that in many ways.
Are you finding that as maybe the cost and the time it takes to generate content falls, that the world is just inundated with more and more content across more and more channels? I mean, I think maybe the typical example people come to is email. used to be manageable now, because generating email copy and content and such is so easy to do, and it's such great software like Instantly and other software to manage email campaigns, that people are just inundated with a lot of like spammy type of messages. Some that might be better than others, but still, like the sheer volume makes it hard to kind of go and unpack. How is that shaping or changing how you do marketing effectively, I suppose?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, so it's one that I actually have been thinking about because you're right. You have the ability now to, when you have that efficiency, to create more and more content. The idea behind this though is to how do you scale it appropriately? And I think that's part of the strategy now, or part of the it's not so much a problem. It's a good problem to have, in my opinion, but it's how do you now bake that into your overarching strategy to make sure that when you are putting things in the market, we like to use the word flood the market, but we literally don't want to flood the market so much that we end up cannibalizing our own work, right? And it doesn't allow a good marketing piece, a good piece of content to sit there and cook, as the kids like to say, right? So I think allowing us to really think about what we're creating, and then really think about how we're putting that in the market, and then how are we rotating that out, how are we really aligning our campaigns appropriately so we have the right amount of content, whether it's from the mass media commercials all the way down to the simple blog that goes on our website. How do we make sure that is aligned appropriately so that it's still meeting the needs and also producing the results that we look to see without hurting our own initiatives?
I think one of the best analogies I've seen around what good marketing looks like is when you see advertising, let's say for shopping, right? Like, yeah, and algorithmically you see this in terms of like Google ads and maybe ads through other social platforms. But when you have really good personalized ad targeting, it feels additive to your experience in the sense of it showcases a product that you could really identify with. Maybe you already do identify with, right? So let's say you're into athleisure, maybe for a particular type of sport, like let's say mountain climbing, whatever it might be, and you get an ad for a new brand that is in the mountain climbing space, and it doesn't feel intrusive. It feels value add, as, oh, here's an ad. It's an ad. You know it's an ad, but it feels like it's informative to you, and potentially enhances your experience, because now you spent maybe 15 seconds looking at an ad, but that ad is something that you may find valuable, and you may purchase from that brand. And so it is a ad that feels really well calibrated. And I think the one big thing that the challenge that marketing always has had, and I think is a huge concern or problem, is how do you get enough data in a space like yours, where let's just say the marketing that you do feels very dialed in, very calibrated, very authentic, instead of spammy, right? So you're not flooding the
Hmm.
market with more marketing. You're surgically targeting and personalizing this to members or prospective members. So could we talk a little bit about how to do effective marketing? Because as the cost of generating content and cost of distribution falls in some ways, because there's better software and better models and such, then it all comes down to who has better data and who has better calibrated campaigns for their members and prospective members. So I'm curious how that operation looks like on your side.
Yeah, for us, data, for not just for us, but I think for all financials, a lot of financials, we have data amongst data amongst data amongst data at our fingertips, right? We know a lot about our members, and I think the important part to this is understanding what type of data you need to be able to go after and tell that story that you're looking to tell, or attract the member or the prospective member that you're looking to attract. How we go about doing it, it's two ways. One, there's the manual way of really kind of looking at and identifying and scoping out the audience that we want to target. how that audience might lay out based off of basic demographics all the way to the psychographic stuff, and then I like to overlay it with a little bit of AI. And it's not so much the AI to do to pick and choose what's the highest propensity. Really, the AI for us and how we use it is to really catch uh, the think of it as casting a big net, and AI allows us to catch all those fish that maybe we were going to miss, and we found that being able to do it this way, and we've had a couple campaigns that we've run, especially when CDs, certificates of deposits, were really a hot commodity, probably about a year to a year and a half ago, when everybody that the CD push was huge. We were able to use this mindset to be able to exponentially increase our gain when it came to certificate of deposits, because we used the human side of things, doing the data manually, going through it and then kind of scoping through it manually, and then allowing AI to kind of supplement what we felt we were missing. And together, using it together, we had some very successful campaigns that grew our CD portfolio exponentially over those point in time. So, really to kind of go back and really answer your question, yes, it's very important for us to be able to use the data in a way that is smart, and at the same time allows us to be strategic um, and not flood the zone. But also at the same time, I think it's important to understand your capabilities that you may not have or you want to have, to be able to dig a little deeper and peel back that onion to find the right audience that you're going after, to have that higher propensity to have the greater results.
And how personal could you really get with your outreach, right? As you get better data and as you use better AI with the segments that you go after.
We can get extremely personal, all the way down to understanding: are you ready to buy a new car based off of maybe you're shopping at auto parts stores and you're purchasing things that may indicate that you're having car troubles, or you might be bringing your car in a lot to the auto body shop for maintenance. If we see something like that, we can get really personal with that individual and say, hey, you know it can get creepy. And this is the other part too. You don't want to get too creepy and say, hey,
Sure.
we see that you're going to the auto body shop a lot. You might be thinking about getting a new car. We can get like personalized like that. But I think here is another important craft to really start zeroing in on as marketers. And that is, how do you get personal enough without being creepy, but at the same time, letting the consumer think about, oh yeah, you're right. I probably am. I have been thinking about that new car, and since I'm thinking about that new car, thanks for being top of mind for me. I'm gonna think of Capital Credit Union now when I take out that loan.
Yeah, I think it's very clever because yeah, they might be thinking about it. Maybe not might not even be top of mind or might be a little bit more subconscious, but you kind of get them thinking about it. And maybe the timing isn't perfect, right? It's close, maybe it's a few months away, but you've seeded this idea in their mind, and when they actually get around to it, you may increase the chances of getting a call by 30-40%, right? That's a material bump in terms of exposure. Um, and so that's brilliant, right? And I think doing it in a way where it doesn't feel creepy and it feels additive, that's a fine balance. But I think that's exactly right.
Yep. Yep. And I think that's the other part where sometimes when we talk about personalization, the first thing we think about is, oh, I want to put your name on something because I'm gonna speaking to you, and and then I'm gonna get even a little bit more personal, diet, knowing a little bit more about you. That's one way to look at personalization. The other way of looking at personalization in my mind is just, about what they're trying to do, or you have this assumption of what they're trying to do. So instead of kind of talking to them, help them think through what it is that they're probably thinking about, right? There's a difference in that type of messaging.
My question for you is around how you compete with also the bigger players, and I think the pressure for credit unions is substantial. I mean, as it is with all financial services organizations. I mean, it's just a very competitive space. But credit unions, you just have to worry about the big banks and like the Wells Fargos and the Chases and the Bank of Americas and such. But there are also these neobanks and you have the Chimes and the SoFis and such. How do you think about managing against all of that competition? Um, where do you have critical advantages uh, among fintechs as well as the mega banks that you might be competing with?
I think the one primary advantage is around the community. We have that community connection. That's the number one differentiator, I think, between us and the big banks and the fintechs. The other part to it, though, is probably going back to the idea of the data side of things. And now, yeah, we're rich in member data, um, and we have those deep trusted relationships that I just talked about that really kind of set us apart. But at the end of the day, how we compete is how we turn that data into actionable insights, right? That's how we also close the experience gap, not only from the person to person, but also the digital experience gap between us, the big banks, and the fintechs. I think it's also looking at what we are also just kind of talking about is that leveraging of the personalization, right? How do we personalize? How do we continue to create that connection? But also credit unions, if they want to continue to compete at a level with the big banks, we're never going to catch up with their spend. They're always going to be able to outspend us. But if we can continue to invest in the modern technology, that will also help us close those gaps. But then also by investing in that modern technology, we also have to understand how it is it the right technology, right? Is it right for your organization uh, at that point in time to be able to connect to the members that you're looking for? I think too often there's so many different tools out there that may allow us or we may think allows us to catch up to the bigger banks or the bigger players that are spending a lot of money. And when we do that, we tend to piecemeal things together without fully understanding what that customer journey or member journey is, and to really be able to find the right tool that kind of answers the question or solves the problem across the entire continuum, right? And then also at the end of the day too, how we differentiate, how we compete. I'm going to go back to that community side. How do we collaborate with our partners? How do we stand out within the community? Because I think if you're able to stand out amongst others, your peers, your competition within the community, they recognize you a little bit more. You become top of mind, and then that supports any initiative that you put behind on your digital transformation journey.
I love that clarification because I think the data that you have, the in-person experiences you have, they far outstrip what neobanks currently have, right? Because they're just newer in the market. They don't have as much data in some ways, and the bigger banks struggle with kind of the last mile personalization and connective tissue. They have more capital and they have bigger brand and such. So I think it's like leaning into your strengths, but still competing well when it comes to leveraging modern software, particularly modern AI, to close the gap. And I think that's exactly where we see an opportunity in the market is and everyone's having to kind of rethink how to build a more modern operation, an operation that leverages more of what artificial intelligence presents. It's akin to people moving into the internet era, right? So having web apps and then eventually mobile apps and such. Everyone had to navigate it. I think the timeline that people had to work against was a little bit longer back then. I think change is happening more quickly. I think the markets are more interconnected. The pace of just adoption, pace of market impact is a little bit faster this time around. I mean, that's likely notable difference, but it's similar in other ways in the sense that it's a big inflection point. Everyone needs to navigate through it, and then it'll come down to who's using what's available to them and leaning into their unique strengths to manage that. And I think credit unions have incredible data, incredible interaction with members, and it's about letting that shine through. What's really interesting is when you think about even also younger demographics, right, like Gen Zs, they really care about values, right? They're very value oriented, more than even who's going to give you the best price on something, right? It's more about the values orientation. And credit unions should fare extraordinarily well on that front because of the values that credit unions typically have, and it starts with members being first, right? And it feels less cold and clinical, let's say, than some of the fintech or big bank experiences. And so it's about how to showcase those values, but still deliver modern digital experiences that Gen Zs care about because they still want ease of use. And I think when you match the two, really great values orientation plus really modern digital experiences, I think there's such great potential there. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that front, but it's something that we've heard and seen firsthand over the past year.
Yeah, yeah, the the younger generation, you're right, absolutely right. They lean into those values. And I think again, I think it comes back down to if a credit unions in general, want to continue to compete on a larger scale, that's one of the key things that they need to lean into. But on top of that, I think it's important for our organization, as it is for any credit union organization, to really not only lean into that value, but also still lean in to that idea of how are we going to invest into our business to be able to meet the member where they're at all the time, right? Not just some of the time, all the time. And I think what's also important to remember is that while, yes, the younger generation that's coming up, they may lean into a brand in a completely different way. It's important that we don't forget about those other generations as well, because at the end of the day, the moms and the dads of the Gen Zs, you know, we may think we know it all, but we're also still learning from them. So as society changes, as the way we communicate, the way we interact changes, that generation and those other generations before them are continuing to change as well with that generation. So the adoption side of things, it goes back and forth. So however, when we think about, especially myself, from a marketing side of things, when I think about a strategic marketing plan and putting together what that looks like for the year, it's looking at, yes, our core audience that we want to target, but also at the same time, how do we not make sure we're not missing the outskirts of that bullseye, so to speak, to be able to make sure we're meeting everybody, every member where they're at, how they want to be communicated to, how they want to interact with us. It's important to make sure that we are interconnecting all those different channels. I think another buzzword outside of AI that's out there today is that word of omni-channel, right? How are we perfecting the omni-channel experience? That's where that's where the magic really happens, and that's where the differentiation can happen as well.
I love that, Steve. You're right. It's like different segments, different demographics, and different orientation, right? And I think it comes down to the data you have and the software you bring to the table to take advantage of that data to do that personalization. But let's talk about the people side of things, because one of the things is software can only get you so far. You still need really great people. You have really great people, but with any new technology, it is hard, right? And you mentioned this earlier, but if felt like for your team that they were cheating at a test, right? But what's interesting is over the last 3 years, especially in the U.S., perhaps more so than in other markets around the world, and this is true from surveys and such, is that the narrative around AI is pretty pessimistic, right? And some of it is like it used to be skepticism, like AI can't really do this. I don't believe it. It's fake, and it's not very good. We're seeing maybe perhaps a little bit less of that skepticism, but what you're seeing is now fear around job loss, fear around creativity dying, fear around dehumanizing the experience both for members as well as employees. How do you work with your team to make sure that the team adopts AI in a pragmatic manner?
A short and simple answer is use it. You got to use it. It's one of those things where it's not going to go away. In fact, it's going to continue to change the way we interact, the way we do things. So, the old, what is the old adage? You can't beat them, join them type
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
You
Hmm.
got so, but at the same time, it's not just about using it; it's about using it right. Again, going back to earlier in the conversations, how are you allowing it to be a complement to everything that you do versus allowing it to do it for you? Because the minute you start allowing it to do it for you, then yeah, why do we need you? Why do you need that job, right? But if you allow it to use it in a way that complements you and allows you to be more efficient, um, I think the one thing we hear about or we dream about sometimes is I wish I could be in two places at once. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
You now have a tool to allow you to be two places at once, in some form or fashion. So
Hmm.
you got to use it.
I think that's some of the most pragmatic advice I've heard. Just use it, rip that band-aid off. You'll learn from the experiential aspect of it. So I think maybe looking ahead, if you look out in 2 or 3 years, what does a well-run credit union marketing operation look like once AI is more fully integrated?
I think they're not the people aren't going anywhere. People aren't going anywhere. Now, will it allow? Will it maybe challenge you know, organizations to view marketing as, do I need all those people? Maybe, but I wouldn't fear that really, because at the end of the day, I think every organization and I will say, I wish marketing would do more. And yeah, sometimes we hear that. I wish marketing would do more. They need to do more. Well, we have this tool now to allow us to do a little bit more. We could take a team of 10 and make them feel like a team of 20, depending on how you choose to use that tool, right? It's all about how you use it, all about how you integrate it into your daily routine. Um, but it will never, I believe, I believe that it will never take away from the need of a marketer. Because again, a tool can allow you to get or build a framework a little bit faster, but you need the people to execute it. You need the people to execute it. Artificial intelligence is not going to be able to execute the plan. You need the people to be able to execute the plan. And that's where I think good teams are going to become great, is how they leverage the tool to execute with greatness.
I agree with you, Steve, on that. And I think one of the challenges that we see is that for individuals and teams and orgs that are very outcome oriented, AI just give you supercharged powers to have more outcome, more impact, right? And so they're very keen in adopting it. I think on the flip side, you do have pockets of individuals, people, teams across organizations that they kind of like the old way of doing things, right? They're older ways of working, and they are a little bit more resistant to change because they don't want to go and have to adapt to some newer thing. And it's in some ways it's sad because they're not as like impact or outcome oriented, so they don't really care that they could potentially have more outcome or more impact. They just don't want things to change for themselves or their ways of working, and maybe some of that comes out of fear from job loss and such. But I think that's kind of the last hurdle. That's the thing that I think that I struggle with and that keeps me up at night, which is like, are we organizationally adopting AI quickly enough and adopting our ways of working now that design's changing, engineering is changing, product is changing, go to market is changing, everything's changing, right? I want to make sure everyone is adopting that at the pace that we need to. But I broadly agree with your insights.
Yeah, it's a new world. It's an ever changing world. It's one that is changing rapidly. I think one of the conversations that I overheard once about a week ago, again, came down to that generation speak, right? And it was this idea that if we look back at all the way back to the silent generation, the baby boomers, to Gen X, to millennials, and you look at the year space between each generation, and you look at now we're at Gen Z, and then you got Gen Alpha, and then you have, I think, Gen Beta or something like that that's coming up. That the year time frame between those different generations have significantly shrunk. And the only reason why it has shrunk or has slimmed down is because of the world changing in the fast. Because each of those generations had an important milestone, whether it was World War II, whether it was the change of technology of Y2K or whatever, to now you have COVID, and then you have AI, and then you're going to have this, and that's changing the way we think. It's changing the way we do things. It's changing the way we interact now, and it's going to change the way we market. So the game is changing, and we have to be ready to change with it.
Steve, I really appreciate all the insights here. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us, and excited to see how the next few years look for you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time.